No, it's still cool.
Yeah, you're on. You have to do it on this. Is that all right?
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I've got a hub here.
Steve, is LabVIEW 2018 on there?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, it's not my laptop.
No, I'm just asking because I need LabVIEw, or at least Max.
Oh, 2018, 17. It's got
okay,
Mac.
fine, I just went to the LabVIEw demo. It's all right.
Is it possible for you to log in as well and share screen from your laptop?
Ooh, that might work. I might be able to log in remotely into your.
I mean, I don't need LabVIEw, I just need Max because I've got a DAC.
All right.
It's part of my demo.
Yeah, we've got Max on it.
Okay, that's fine.
There you go, mate.
Is that Max?
It's a very glowy mouse.
Oh, was that DAC Max? Oh, I don't know. Add Max.
Probably has to.
It's a standard build, isn't it?
What, me?
Cool. So I had two things listed, and I don't think anybody piped up with a particular preference one way or the other. So I've started to talk about open source because, frankly, I've had a really busy week and I can put it together quicker. But if you want me to talk to me about CI, I'm happy to do that afterwards as well. But the reason for talking about this is that there's been a few kind of discussions. I did a blog post a couple of months ago now, and I've still got a follow-up to come to really hopefully just demystify a little bit of it. There are reasons why it's hard in LabVIEW, but there's no reasons why we couldn't, as a community, end up doing more, because I've certainly made good use of the open source libraries that are already there. Comes the usual caveats, I'm not a lawyer. Speak to a lawyer if you're concerned. And really, I was kind of reflecting on it, there's really, open source is kind of used in two different ways right now. The strictly proper way is open source is a type of license. But I'm going to talk a little bit about open source as a type of project, which is kind of a subtly different thing. So I'm going to whiz through the license bit because it's kind of boring, but I know it's a bit that can make people hesitant. So hopefully I'm going to tell you how I understand it and demystify some of that a little bit. Move on to that. So software licensing is something that all of us do every day, seeing as we're all developers. You bash out your code and you end up with some source code and you end up with a finished product, something packaged. And every time you give someone that finished package, you give them a license to use it. So this is your iTunes, end user license agreement you just click through. There has to be some way, because you own the copyright on what's in here. So for someone else to use it, you have to provide them with a legal right to use it, which is what the license does. Now, open source comes from where most products, you would only be given the complete package. An open source license defines that you have to also provide that source code to the end user. So it's a special software license that includes the rights, certain rights to do with the source code as well. What it isn't is you're not handing over the copyright. You're not signing your life away with it. You still own the copyright to that code, but you're just giving someone more rights in the use of that code than you would do normally. There's broadly two license types. This is where it gets more interesting. So the first is what we call a permissive license, and this is a pretty free-for-all license. To be called an open source license, they have to meet certain freedoms, which is what these are. So basically, the short version is you have the freedom to use it, but you also have the freedom to inspect it, understand how it works, and modify it according to your needs. There's a more restricted version, which are normally called the copyleft licenses. So with a standard permissive license, I can release something open source. You can build it into you can use it in your LabVIEW code, and then you can release your LabVIEW code under a different license. Copyleft is what, there was a famous quote attributed to Bill Gates, I think, that open source is a cancer. And this is what he's referring to, a virus, sorry. Because what copyleft then says, it says, if you use my open source code in your software, you now have to make your software open source as well. So this is the bit that makes people nervous, especially in kind of commercial settings. So some of the names you will hear, so basically from the commercial point of view, really, just keep hearing things are okay. The most common kind of permissive licenses are there's BSD and there's a version 2 and a version 3, and I won't go into all the details. There's an MIT license, which is very permissive, and there's an Apache license, which is similar, but it has something to do with legal rights and patents that I don't understand enough to explain to you right this second. So this is what you will tend to see. Open source libraries in LabVIEW will tend to be under these because it removes that complexity of the kind of commercial usage. Where you should be concerned is if you see a copy left. So the most famous one is GPL. Sorry, I can't remember, there's a screen here as well. If you see GPL, I would basically assume you cannot use that in a commercial project. There are a couple which are called weekly copyleft, which is the lesser GPL, LGPL is the other common one. Broadly, what this means is you cannot use the source code in your product, but you could use a built DLL and call it from your product without your product having to also be under the GPL license. So there's a couple of variants, but as I say, I mean, the best thing, frankly, is avoid this bit unless you really need to.
Doing any military work, any of the copyleft stuff, they won't go with at all because you have to push. I think part of your commitment is you push back changes.
Yeah, so
you don't have to push back changes, but you have to provide source code if requested. Yeah,
yeah,
and that's just.
So is that not a condition for the permissive ones that you mentioned as well? If you make any modifications, you have to possibly back.
So if you basically no, you can take that work and you can create what the legal term is a derivative work and do whatever the hell you like with it. If you want to keep that private, you can keep that private.
BSD is just completely.
Yeah, basically. My favourite one.
Actually, the only thing with BSD is you have to provide their license with your release.
Yes, so most of these, what they will all insist on is that you still have to recognise the copyright.
Yeah.
So again, when you do this, the original developer still owns the copyright. So if you open LabVIEW, there's a page somewhere in the help which is here's the copyright notices for all the open source projects we use. You can't claim that work as your own. But that'll be common across all of them.
The only important, my stuff called BSD license. The only important thing is the legal disclaimer that I'm not responsible for using stupid for this.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it. I don't care about copyright.
So that's the other variant.
Some hidden thing says that I wrote it, and I'm going to really have no responsibility.
Yeah, there's some variations of that. Now, well, there are some issues with that in Europe, apparently, but I don't know all the ins and outs of that, because you have to provide a certain warranty. But by and large, that's the other thing. It's in all of these licenses, which is, it's on you. You do with it what you want. I don't hold any responsibility for it.
When you are delivering a product to your customer, are you writing the license properly? Are you going through the list of all open Gs which you are using, and then when you do the build and all the new colors?
So the interesting thing with that is,
if you didn't do it, you violated the license, so they're still not responsible.
But
I don't care if you put it in, because if you don't put it in when you're supposed to, you
sorry, but you are responsible that you should put it in.
Yes.
As the big last builder, you should put it in, because you should tell them that it's there. Of course, I'm not now talking about your responsibility, how you did that the function, and is it working or not.
So one of the,
I only care about the legal thing.
But you can also be sued to remove it as well. That's how they can sort of come up and say, no, you can't use the toolkit.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, if the toolkit's doing something that's, months and months and months of work can be a real problem.
I mean, so the way that I try and manage that myself right now is this is one of the things that's keeping me on VI Package Manager Pro. Because then if everything I install is through VI Package Manager, I create a configuration file and I can literally go package by package and see what the license terms are. It's not perfect, but it helps for management and things like that. But you're right, if you're just copying and pasting stuff from random, you should be tracking that separately somewhere. That's my kind of shortcut to doing that, to help with that. And so like I say, commercial use, if you're in a permissive space, you're going to be pretty safe. So the other thing I really wanted to talk about, or actually the main thing I really wanted to talk about anyway, because I don't enjoy the legal stuff, is open source as a type of project. What I really mean by this is technically I can beaver away on my laptop and just provide you with a VI file and a built version, and you never have to see anything more than that, and that's an open source project if it has the right license. But really, what people are talking about now when talking about open source is also this kind of idea of developing in the open more and more. It's not the legal definition, but as soon as you start talking about open source, so if someone says there's an open source library, you're going to go Google on GitHub, on Bitbucket, on GitLab, one of these open kind of repository sites where they have these tools available. And I think that's the more interesting one because I think that's the hard bit, frankly, in LabVIEW. And so what I wanted to do is just talk about the anatomy of that a little bit and help you understand kind of if you wanted to do this, either contribute or put a project out there, kind of what's in those. So, I'm assuming this is on the internet. Good. So I'm going to just pull up, if I get this right, the command line tool that I developed for LabVIEW and give you an idea. So this has been published open source. It's under the BSD license. It's quite an interesting one because there's bits of C# as well. Interestingly, I've actually had contributions to C# and nothing to LabVIEW. But to give you an idea, so when we first come into a page on GitHub and Bitbucket and GitLab and all the others that have similar features, there's a few things you'll see. So here we have the source code directly. So this is a Git repository. I can go and see all the previous commits, in this case, as I want to. There's normally a README file, and this is intended to basically give you some early information. So generally how to install it, maybe how to contribute to it, maybe some examples of how it works. There may also be a separate contributing guide. So this is actually really important in LabVIEW because we have to worry about stupid stuff like versions of LabVIEW. And in this case, there's a bit more information on setting up the C# side as well. So normally that will be the information you need to actually build it, and sometimes there'll be details then of if you want to contribute, this is how we're looking for contributions to happen. The bits that will vary a little bit, but most of them will have some kind of public issue tracker, and I actually think this is a really important part of these open source projects. So here we can see all of the reports that have bugs that have reported, which can be by the owner or anybody else. This provides somewhere to have discussions about the project, and that's been really important and really useful in the projects I've put up. I also try and put possible enhancements on there as well, because when we come to contributing, I want to make sure that people understand the direction the project's going in. But I'll talk a little bit more about that.
There's a big problem of kind of collaborative development like this in LabVIEW. There's not enough LabVIEW developers.
Yeah.
So here, all these issues are you except for one. And in my project, I find it's mostly me except for like one or two people.
Yeah.
A little bit, and it's like not really working. It's not like you got 50 people coming to you.
No, but it's getting better. It is getting better.
It's time to create some incentives.
Well, I think when they've stopped updating LabVIEW, you may find that now, because people don't want to maintain. One barrier for me was always if I release a version, it's LabVIEW 2014, and I've got to update it, I've got to install LabVIEW 2015 on my machine, I've got to do 16, I've got to do 17.
I just do everything in it.
But you know, it's a maintenance headache, whereas I think 17 and 18 are now
with built stuff, but I don't think I'm not sure that has swayed into action yet, put it that way.
Okay. You may find that there's the disadvantage of them not upgrading every year.
Yeah, I mean most
advantage in this field.
Yeah, I mean most projects I'm aware of seem to support like 2013 or 2015, and generally that's what's done. It's built back then, and then BIPM manages doing it all up. Yeah, so I think if we were distributing built like PBLs and stuff, that would come in, start to factor in. I'm not sure we're seeing an effect of that yet. I mean, there's different things. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is to try and actually say, even though we're a small community, there's no reason why we can't do a bit more. And my feeling is because we haven't come from traditional software backgrounds, some of this is a bit less familiar. And that's kind of why I want to run this, because I've actually seen in the last couple of years, I've put stuff up over the years, and I've got two in particular where I've actually started getting more and more contributions. And there's, okay, admittedly, I think it's one or two people who are kind of keen on open source and LabVIEW, but nonetheless, it's happening. And you know, Jake urged that Crier update, and that had a list of about 4 or 5 different contributors who had updated the GitHub page. So I feel like they may be starting to get a little bit of momentum behind this concept, and that's why I wanted to talk about it.
Report, I'm on that list because I made a suggestion. I didn't change it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That actually is better because I like people make suggestions.
Yeah.
I actually,
And that's important too. Yeah, so I'll come back around to that. But yeah. Trying to think that the other things here is obviously generally, and different people will manage this differently. For me, I tend to use the releases version of wherever I am as well, so you can come in and find and download the installers. Obviously that varies a lot more though, but generally on that first README page, they should tell you this is where you get it to install it, or this is how to download it. That's a cool. Oh yeah, I accidentally saved over my PowerPoint template with this, so I'm glad for version history in OneDrive when I remembered to do it. So there's multiple people who are involved in an open source project, and so you'll hear these kind of terms. So the owner author is generally the original developer. So in the LabVIEW CLI case, I am the owner and the author. I kind of hold the central repository for that, although there's nothing sort of stops someone creating their own repository and just working there. You might also hear maintainer as well, probably less so on LabVIEW projects because they tend to be smaller. This is normally someone who is also helping to administrate their project. They probably have, you know, full admin rights to the repository and help kind of drive the direction of the project as well. A contributor is someone who's somehow contributed to the project, and that doesn't just mean writing code. That could mean writing documentation, creating examples, creating videos, even reporting issues. All of these things are valuable. So if I wanted to take anything away from today, is doing open source doesn't mean having to create a project and do a load of coding. Just if you're using these projects, report back bugs, because exactly as James said, or new features, it's so useful to you to know anybody's bothering to use it. And it's worth me, because I've had projects and you put it up and you hear nothing in 6 months. Well, I'm not going to put any time into that. Whereas the LabVIEW CLI tool, quite frankly, I probably would have done the same, but there's been so much interest in it, I've actually carved out the time to keep pushing it forward. So as simple as that, having discussions, making suggestions are all really useful. And it can be creating documentation. And use the project, obviously. If it's useful, then use it and provide that feedback. So yeah, creating issues for bugs is really useful. Because again, you've all done it right, where you create a project for yourself, and the way you want to use it works perfectly. The way that someone else may want to use it is different, and they'll find more interesting things. Spoke about documentation. Contributing code. So I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the pull request system. I'm not going to go into great detail because honestly, it's hard in LabVIEW, and I think this is the biggest barrier we're going to have.
That's the biggest problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a huge issue.
Control is difficult for LabVIEW.
Yeah.
If you want to use it the way the source code controls all the time.
Exactly. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'd be interested. I think other people
one
have
pull request on one of my things, and Rather than figure out how to do that, I implemented the changes.
Okay, so that's even more of a problem. Let's figure that out. But if you do want to contribute code, my suggestion is the first thing, if there's a bug in the list, you can probably just grab that and run with it. I don't think anyone's going to complain about having a bug fixed. But obviously look at the overall style of the project. So for example, one of mine, it's actually a unit testing tool. So I kind of ask that people do create unit tests for the work. So bearing that in mind, generally if there's a bug on there, you know, on the issue list, just maybe put a comment saying, yeah, I can look into this and do that work. For new features, what I would discourage, and maybe this is me personally, and I'll talk about this, is that when you own the project, you have ideas in your head and you have a direction you want to follow. And what you don't want is 100 random new features. So all of a sudden, a simple product has become very complicated. So for new features, I would start an issue, something on the issue tracker, start a discussion with the owner or the maintainer and say, is this something you're interested in? You know, maybe have a quick discussion how that might be implemented and kind of work with them on getting that in. Because nobody wants to spend a load of time on a new feature for it to have a pull request rejected. Say, no, we thought about this, but we decided not to do it because of X, Y, Z.
That's actually one of the comments I have. Why don't open source projects? Why are they not a bit more disciplined in the sense that why is like a vision not laid out upfront in terms of have a little list of requirements? This is what we're trying to achieve.
The honest answer is they do. So one of the things that I've realized the more I've dug in is it's a lot less of a free-for-all than it may appear from outside.
Right.
So every project will have someone who is driving that vision. How public they are with it depends on how they manage it.
Where do you find it in GitHub?
Yeah,
which is really not a story, you know.
But yeah, I mean, and that's the question of how the individual projects manage. But it's not just these projects aren't somewhere where someone just randomly goes, oh, it'd be cool if this did this, and they chuck some code into it. There is someone who will tell you, no, we don't want to do it like that. And the level of that varies. There's a really interesting Medium posting the other day about someone from a big JavaScript project who said, we're rejecting everything, or no, we're not rejecting everything, but expect to have stuff rejected. You know, we've managed over the years to keep a really slim, defined project. And if we accepted everything that everybody wanted us to do, it would be unwieldy. There are other projects that are more open and just say, yeah, just chuck code in. But there is someone, whether it's behind the scenes or a bit more publicly, who is driving that. And that's why I wanted to say about this for new features is you know, don't go and spend hours on something and just expect it to automatically be accepted, because there's some thought into that. So I spoke about pull requests. I'm not going to spend hours on this because this is a whole presentation in its own right. Basically, Git was invented for this purpose. It was originally invented to manage the Linux source code because I didn't like the way existing tools did it. The gist of it is, if you wanted to make a change to a project on GitHub or any of these tools, they mostly follow the same flow. The idea is that you create a branch, and actually this can be as simple. You might also hear create a fork, and what that means is you create your own copy on GitHub, which kind of is a branch anyway. You put your commits into your branch or your fork of that project, and then you open a pull request. And that's a way of going to a customer and going to the original project saying, here's some changes I'd like you to integrate in. At that point, there might be some discussion and some review. So again, I've had that on the other testing project. I had someone implemented something, and I kind of went back and said, yeah, it's nice, but I kind of thought if we did it like this, it'll be a bit better. So they went back and just changed the structure slightly. And then the maintainer or the owner will merge that into their project. And that's the really fun bit. I have done this with LabVIEW code, but mostly like it just makes you so sad when you do it on like a text-based thing and it's just like, yep, merge, boom, done.
I want that.
Yeah. And in LabVIEW, it is more work on the maintainer to do that. I don't know what the right answer to that is yet. Hopefully we can have more discussions and figure something out.
Merge and different merge tools.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare. I mean, from a maintainer point of view, what I do is you can actually check it out locally. So that's what I do now. I can check it out, just the pull request from my Git, and I manually merge it on my desktop. And assuming there's not too many library changes, or there's not conflicting changes, then it works okay. But if you had a big project, it would be an absolute nightmare. It would be a complete mess.
Probably give up on trying to merge block diagram and actually just merge the eyes. Just give up. Just say no. Just a VI. That's the thing. You can merge that into your project, but block diagram merge is just the thing.
Well, the issue isn't even that actually. Honestly, the most of the time, the problem right now is projects and libraries.
Yeah,
That's what will kill your project. Block diagram merge, for me, and again, very limited experience with this, doesn't come up a lot. It's a lot less frequent
So
than.
if you drop a new VI into a project, that will cause you problems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the project, although it's XML and it merges nice, the tool Git thinks it merges it fine, but because you haven't stuck to the NI convention of creating that XML file, your project now becomes corrupt. Sometimes, not all the time, sometimes.
It's if you're trying to merge two projects that have both been changed
Yeah.
relative to what they started from.
Yeah,
Then
it's just in my
if you only make changes in one project, you can sometimes merge
Yeah.
those in if they have a common parent. And one
Yeah,
thing
what I'm
changes.
saying is don't try and merge projects, don't try and merge block diagrams. You can't just drop a VI into your project.
So the project's harder to avoid in the normal development cycle, but that's essentially what I end up doing if I have a merge like that. Is I will check it out and I'll just move the VIs over and add them into the relevant libraries, assuming there's only a few VIs involved. But yeah, that's the big issue right now. I do think if NXG solves that, life will get easier, because I do think block diagram merges are certainly far more unusual than library and project merges.
I think one thing that helps is separating source from compile code.
Mhm.
That makes a massive difference.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be fair,
And
that's
also,
critical as well.
I mean, if you don't do that, you're gonna
Yeah.
have conflicts for no reason. But also a bit of when I'm developing and I see a VI, LabVIEW forces you to save a VI when you know nothing's changed. I don't commit that. I go back and I revert the change.
Yeah, I do that.
I think you're.
I never hit save all because I don't want LabVIEW to just recompile something that hasn't changed and become part of my Git history when there's no reason for it to be there.
I think you're absolutely right. I just never trust myself to actually keep that up.
When I have a doubt, my commit note for that VI will be LabVIEW's recompile this.
Yeah.
Rather than, but if I know for a fact nothing's changed, I just revert it.
Yeah.
Because LabVIEW's recompiled it for a reason.
Not always.
No, sometimes the front panel will change. When you open it in one PC and then open it on the second
Yeah,
PC.
not always.
Till you run it, sometimes it thinks it's changed.
And the front panel will change.
It will have changed it for a reason, maybe not a reason you care about.
Oh yeah, I mean there's things of that. I mean, if you embed something active into your project, for example, that will then change, like a database directory or file.
Yeah.
But
I've diffed on occasionally, and it actually gives me two main boxes at the bottom.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
You have to click update, and then it will show you front panel change.
Okay.
And then you could cancel it and
Because also the default setup for the diff tool that NI give you for Git, I don't know, NI has been developed with the community, ignores certain cosmetic changes, which may mean that that's what caused it, but it'll get ignored in the list.
I've had it with hardware drives. That's the only time I ever see that. Is if you've got a different version of hardware drive with the VI.
Often the project wants to save it and you save it, but then Mercurial, as I'm using, will say there's no change. Probably is it?
Yeah.
Is there not a button that tells you what has changed?
No, yeah, a property has changed.
Oh yeah, we get that, yeah. Yeah.
James, can I ask what a merge actually means from your terms? Is it like taking one file and overwriting a file, or is it a true binary, LabVIEW style merge? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, it can essentially be either, depending on how much has changed and how active the project's been. But exactly that. In the worst case, You have a base version, you've made some changes, contributors made some changes, and you've got to figure all of that out.
Yeah, that's the worst case.
Yeah. Now, depending on the project, what some projects will insist on is before you create a pull request or before it will be accepted, is you have to come right up to date with the main trunk. Yeah. So then the merging is on you. Although to me that seems like a race condition, right? you can go do it. By the time you've done it, you've got to do it again. But yeah, so it could be.
So from a binary file point of view, we have something called large file system enabled in our repositories. I don't know whether that changes the behaviour. You know, it just becomes like a file overwrite as when you merge.
Good question. I don't know.
Because that's what we have, and we don't tend to run, and we don't have merging really. It's just overwriting.
We basically shout to the rest of the room, "I've got that file." With the files that we all.
No, but even at that, once you do an update, it basically kind of handles it on Git.
Apart from project.
Apart from project.
Project probably doesn't mind.
Yeah.
No, but
And databases, it's a bit.
Yeah.
Databases shouldn't be on there anyway.
We have got the rule that you shouldn't commit the project only when you should do it only when you change something in project. Otherwise, you should.
You should only, with the four of us that work on it, we only commit the project if we've shouted the rest of the room, "Am I okay?"
Yeah.
Because there's only four of us. We
Yeah.
check with the others, and only after it we actually make a change.
Did you want?
I mean, I know things like SVN, because you can lock it, can't you? So you can actually.
You can't get it.
Yeah.
That's what you
Yeah.
lose. Speaking of what you lose with advanced technologies,
Yeah,
with Git you lose it.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how Git would do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Our lock mechanism at the moment is talking to each other.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very valid, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I
It's a
think
little,
I think this is where structure is important. You know, it comes back to coupling cohesion.
I'll be
Good cohesion is going to reduce this a lot, and but it's an ongoing problem.
I will just chip in that we use classes very little. We use LV-libs very little. We don't. Our projects tend to be very static. So when we load it on a machine, it doesn't change for any arbitrary reason.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting it out there that I would view a project that changes for no reason as a problem that needs solving.
So take a look at defining the LFS, because you can say a .vi and a .ccl are basically a large file.
Yeah.
And so get LFS is one of the things you could look at. I'm not sure if it's going to help you with your merging, but it feels like it.
It's worth looking at.
I'm not sure, because I'm inexperienced myself.
Yeah. It's definitely worth looking into. Yeah, because I've never dug into it. I've seen it as an option before, but I've never.
Yeah.
What about front panel changes? No, I mean not modification of the front panel, but the position of the VI and front panels of the because I understand everybody likes to develop some way, and then when you receive the code from somebody else, and all the VIs are now in different places.
Yeah.
This is another thing which drive me crazy. I have only one colleague. Yes.
So this comes to, in this context, really, of you can manage this project however you want, depending on how much willing to piss people off. So remember, it is your project. So if you want to put it, and you have to tell people, you have to give people the opportunity to do it right. You put it in there saying, you know, before you commit any code, we want front panels like this, or we want it to pass these the analyzer tests, and you're then well within your right to just say reject it and say, don't get me wrong, maybe you'll get less contributions, but it's your project to manage as you will and put value on what you want. So if I will create a project, I will not take anything without doing the testing, which I know excludes a lot of people. But for me, that's how I maintain and manage my code. And I would, well, that and I want more people to learn unit testing, so it's a bit of a...
So James, is there not a way to automatically set up a framework where you do this via, run this via analyzer, run some unit tests, and then automatically reject?
So that's my other discussion on CI. I mean, so right now there's tools coming and there's tools few and far between. So what I have is you can set up CI servers to, when someone creates that pull request, go through those steps. And you can even, and I've not got this far, you can then have it automatically reject if it fails something and give them details of report, stuff like that. So you can absolutely do that with CI tools. One of the things that's driven the way that I've looked at CI is I think it would be really good if we could also do that on the desktop. Because it's rubbish saying to someone, to see if your code's okay, you've got to submit it to the server and it'll tell you. It'd be much nicer if you could also run those before you even do the pull request. I have some ideas on that, but we can discuss that later. I think the CI tools that are all being developed should be able to work locally as well as on the server for that use case.
Yeah. So maybe we should target workflows rather than, I know this is like, continuous integration with LabVIEW, but obviously where does the need for continuous integration stem from? And come from the whole workflow. What I'm
it's
saying
automation. It shouldn't be a different thing, CI. It should be automation of what you're supposed to be doing anyway.
So the way I see it, maybe this should have been a project which spawned from a bigger project, which is looking at a workflow. And then you have something like requirements. How do you, automatically manage requirements, things like PDD, PDD, how do you use a tool and get LabVIEW to work with it? And then, okay, how do I continuously integrate? And then maybe some things on how do I release it to customers and all.
Yeah, and to be fair, I completely agree, because that's kind of what I've been doing. I have a CI service app. I don't use it very much. It's one of the reasons I tend to talk more about the CLI bit and not the CI bit. For that reason, because I'm like, it's only useful to me once I've got a workflow that I want it to automate. But yeah.
That's something you're planning already for this project?
I have ideas, and I'm not quite sure which way to go. I'm torn between. One of the ideas I'm thinking is with the command line tool, standardizing, this is how you can put a tool that can auto-detect. So then, because one of the things I don't want to do is develop all these tools myself, frankly. Either. I have some tools that I've been working on, but that was kind of the whole point of putting, and that's a good reason for open source. Have I got it on here? Yeah, that was kind of the whole point of putting the CLI tool out there, was I want CI tools. They need a command line interface. I don't have time to build all the tools, but if I put out the command line bit, then maybe people can use that to build this, those other tools. But yeah, that's an interesting discussion we can probably have over lunch. Cool, so I'll just finish really quickly. I think I've covered most of this. I don't know how we're doing for time, or I feel like I've been going for a while. So should you open source a project that you have? From roughly negative to positive, it does take work. I'm not going to lie, I've had those moments, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen very often. Like I say, it's a very quiet community from that point of view. When you're running around, I've got a customer visit tomorrow, I've got to get something finished, and then something comes in on your inbox from GitHub saying, oh, I've just found this bug in CLI. I really don't have time to worry about this now. It does take some work. If others get involved. If they don't get involved, then it's easy.
Depends on the project. I mean, the biggest projects I have are things that I actually use. So if someone finds a bug in it, I'm actually quite interested in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know I completely agree. Don't get me wrong. It's a very positive thing still. But there will be extra things you have to do because you're getting that extra feedback.
I think eyes on your code is really good. Full stop. If that's the only, I mean,
Even just for reviews.
just by, taking away the actual connotations of open source now, just having open source code to people and having other eyes on the code is a great.
I don't have to pick anything.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily want people to try and build applications.
No.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting thing, and I've kind of discussed this with a few people before, is I don't know what any of your code looks like, mostly. I've never, other than, say, James, for example, I actually know how he codes because I've seen his open source code. So if you're looking to hire people and stuff like that, it's actually really good to have some code out there. Admittedly, if it's just library code, it's different, but I actually do think it's a really good way of then when, especially if you're contracting or something, you can say, yeah, you can go look at this project, this is how I code, this is what I think is important, and you can see some of that.
I think blogs help with that.
I tried to get National Instruments and the community interested in actually reference source code projects, because I thought that'd be a good thing, because you're selling big lumps of hardware, and actually having a big lump of software that works on that big lumps of hardware would be a good thing if it was open source.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of barriers, I found. I mean, toolkits is the way in, I think for the entire project, it's really quite hard.
Yeah,
It's a shame, because it's a missed opportunity, but it's just much easier to actually just license it and get paid for a license than it is actually to open source stuff and do it the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah, and I think these things have scope. I think where these things are really powerful is what I'd call like this, not what I call, what I've heard referred to as, I won't steal the sawdust. I'm not going to generally open source, well, obviously I'm not going to open source my customer's code. And I can see that there's obviously a commercial incentive to keep some things closed source, which I know isn't what you were suggesting, so I'm just pointing at you because you've just referenced licensing as well. And I certainly don't believe everything should be open source. What's really good in my mind is the sawdust, which is the bits that you create which aren't really what you're creating. So like the tools around what you're doing, because it's probably going to be the most useful to further people. And quite frankly, if we all did it, imagine how we might solve more of those problems that that Steve referenced earlier. If we kind of pull that bit that is we're not making money off of it, but we can all become a bit more productive.
I mean, generally for us, pretty much everything up until recently we've ever done has been open source. People pay for it; it's not free.
Yeah.
But we give the source code, and we've always done that. So we don't put any limitations there.
Yeah, you give your source code to a customer who's paying you to write the software rather than if somebody comes off the street saying, I want your framework.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But that's still open source.
Yes. Yeah.
That's could you get and again, military contract should always be open source, but not
to
that. Well, by that definition.
To be pedantic, it may not. It's a bit more complicated because then you get work for hire, which means they owe some of the copyright. So there's a slight difference.
Well, I mean, but in the most brutal sort of definition of open source code is if you give the source code as your deliverable item that people can look at, then that's open source.
Yeah.
Now you have to buy it to pay for it. But I think I've always been very wary of closed source.
Well, and that's the other thing is it's exactly that. It's from a usage point of view. So I recently tried, partially successfully, to use, there's a UI grid open source library for LabVIEW, which uses the .NET grid. Frankly, the customers showed me a wireframe, what he was thinking. I did it the way LabVIEW could do it. We both looked at it and I went, yeah, it's a bit crap, isn't it, compared to wireframe. Right, I can see if I can make this work. And it had problems though, but because it was open source, I was able to work around them. So it makes it a lot safer from our point of view to use libraries if they're open source and you can tweak and work on
use the protected thing because I had a bug, I can't go in and fix it.
And it will be a bug. Going back to the 90% thing, there will be.
Yeah. We've probably covered most of this. I wanted to talk about support again. There's two major extra bits of work if you open source something versus keeping it to yourself. The first one is that kind of contribution and dealing with the merges and stuff like that. Ultimately, unless you're using that flow, you wouldn't have that if it was your own project. The other concern, obviously, is support. My experience with this, again, it's a small community. It hasn't been too bad. I mean, the key thing is to set those expectations. Technically, you have never committed to supporting this project just because you put it on GitHub. You've never said, I'm going to help you with this. Obviously, you want to help and you want to try and work with people. But I think setting those expectations, not treating it, quite frankly, as a paid customer. Paid customers, something on my support, my response times are very, very different. So it can be strenuous, but I think just set the expectations and just try and, it's supposed to be fun, enjoyable, useful. There's nothing to say. You can't just say, if it becomes too much work, you can just cut it off and say, right, support here, or if it's because it's popular, find some people to help you. Get some other maintainers in and say it's really popular. Put your name on it. You can, if you don't mind answering a few support questions. So there's ways to manage that.
Hasn't there been issues with open source projects suddenly becoming so well? The community has done so well, done such a good job that the owner then makes them closed source.
Yep, I'm sure.
And that's I always think in the licensing, that's kind of an interesting thing. If you use somebody else's toolkit and it's open source, well, what happens if it becomes something saleable?
Well,
do they have exclusive rights on the code? Then they can do what they want.
Actually, no.
I think in this case they did something weird, didn't they?
So
I'm trying to remember what
They can take it and make a new version, say this new version is closed source. You can still use the previous version and import it.
And if you,
how Hudson became famous.
So
Yeah,
the community version.
they can't-
like Apache.
yeah, they can't rescind the license they've given you already for the
It might be
version you've
Apache. I'm
got.
thinking of actually. Didn't they do that?
I mean, there's been issues with Oracle, with MySQL, and stuff like that. But there's been a few cases where there's been some funny stuff, and they go to dual licensing often. So there's a community version, and then there's a paid-for version.
Yeah, MySQL certainly got
The really important thing to all of this is about following the copyright around a bit as well. So for use, absolutely they can do that. But if you've made a contribution to a project, when you contribute to a project, what you are doing is you are writing some of your own work, which you own the copyright for, and you're providing them back with a license to use that. But you still own the copyright. So if someone suddenly goes, oh, I can make £1 million off of this, I want to close the source and sell it, they can't do that because you still own part of that source code, unless they assuming you can detect they've done that, of course. They can do. There's malicious ways, of course. Yeah. But legally, you still own that copyright unless you sign that over in some way to them. You'll see something, I noticed JKI do this, is when you contribute, they make you sign up to an agreement. And I haven't looked at the wording of theirs, but normally these are actually to hand over the license, the copyright to JKI as well. And there's very mixed views on those types of agreements in the community. There's reasons from a management point of view, because now if JKI decide they want to use the MIT license instead of the BSD license, they can do that. It does also mean they can technically write you out the project and do what they want with it. So there's very mixed views on whether those are good things and things you should sign up to or not.
There's a history actually in the LabVIEW community. OpenG Commander became a saleable product and turned into VI Package Manager. And originally it was an open source package management tool that was developed by the OpenG community. And then it became a saleable product and was closed source at that point.
Mm-hmm. It's ultimately there's a level of trust that has to go into it as well. So legally there's precedents, obviously proving it and actually doing anything about it if they choose to do it.
It's not possible in any this sort of copyright, isn't it?
Well,
It's a license. It's a legal license.
But you can't, what I'm trying to say is you can't really detect any breaches of.
It's very hard to detect source code.
Yes,
Source code.
Yeah.
How do you say you came up with that, you know?
Yeah.
Rewrite it in your own way. And
Different example is SQLite itself, which is entirely public domain. Every contribution, every author has to sign public domain declaration.
Oh, that's
in national code, this is public domain, there's no copyright.
Removed.
That's why.
Yeah.
Which makes it very simple.
Yeah.
That's very good.
well, what's that?
SQLite is public domain.
Yeah.
You can take it, there's no license, no need for license.
Yeah, so it's the difference between a company-owned open source project.
Yeah. And the company that does it, does all the development on it, they make money because they have interest in it. And big companies want a modification or a special version to do something.
Yeah.
They
Which then they're licensed.
And that's where there's business behind this as well. So Red Hat, they've just sold for what, $15 million or something like that. Billion, sorry. They sell open source software, but they sell it with support packages and things like that. So there's always that option. If you have a toolkit that you're kind of like, I can't frankly be bothered to go through all the effort of getting it on the tools network or something like that, and having an eye to take their slice or whatever. But if you put something useful out there and someone says, we want this, but some companies will insist on having a support package or something. There's nothing preventing you from doing that and then selling the service to them. I'm not saying I think that's very likely in the LabVIEW community. Yeah.
But it's only one VR, so it should be useful. It's too good. So you need to make a big framework and support.
I can make the accurate framework extension.
Cool. Well, that's all I had to say, really. Are there any other questions or anything?
How big is the community on GitHub for LabVIEW-based tools?
It's really hard to judge because a lot of people use it as a dumping ground as well. So I can't remember. Let's see if I can do it. So you can search by language.
You'll find a lot of things like LabVIEW code.
Yeah.
It's more activity is probably more the interesting question. How active is it?
Yeah.
Rather than how big it is.
I'm pretty sure there's more than that.
2 pages.
Yeah, I was going to say that doesn't look. I think I've got my query wrong.
Yeah, you need to make it, and LabVIEW's only recently become a language.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of gaps in the LabVIEW reuse model.
Yeah.
There's lots of libraries we should be doing. I mean, the open document one is a case in point. That should be being actively developed.
Yeah.
There should be an open source reporting library out there. There should be all the SSH, all the secure stuff. There should be libraries for that, and all this stuff. If the system was adequate to encourage the work, but I still think fundamentally LabVIEW has a problem. It's like this constant updating, this constant versioning, this
It makes it
constant
so
cost
hard
of
to do.
support.
Yeah.
Everything like that is not, by the time you get in there, you're not doing it for fun. I'm not going to support your thing for fun. I have a use. I'll use it and then I'll go off and do something else. So that's probably every single toolkit has a similar kind of demographic. It's people who are not into the tool, they want to use the tool.
Yeah.
And that's probably where the issues come. You don't have, I think in like take Java, you have a guy he does Java, but he's the tool supremo. Yeah. Whereas we're all multitaskers, and we're all doing things. The whole process is much quicker. So the tool usage is much quicker. It's an interesting.
I think the size is a huge thing as well, to be frank. I mean, if you just looked at percentage terms of someone who would open source something, I mean, the difference in the size between, JavaScript is kind of held up as the major player in this, but the numbers aren't even on the same scale probably, between LabVIEW and JavaScript, so we can't expect to have the same scale. That said, I think it is being held back partly by that, and partly just by the LabVIEW makes it difficult. Having the incompatible versions, having the source code control issues, makes it a lot more of a headache than it should be. If we just had a file with pure source code, then I think there would be a lot more out there as well.
Do you think a cost is involved as well? Because a lot of the time IDEs for different languages are free most of the time.
Yeah.
And the fact that you bought LabVIEW, if you bought a yearly license, it cost you 300 or 400 quid. And if you went out and bought it, it cost you 10, 15, 20,000 to get something. And you ain't going to do that on the general languages. I know that you can buy
you say that, yeah. I was going to say
you can go and buy the bigger ones if you want, but you can come in at an entry level.
Oh yes, yeah. There's a much easier path in. Yeah.
But there's also, the expertise you would get to be able to produce a library that people will buy into and get involved with. That's, there's a large base in LabVIEW of people who use it, once a month to go run, I've got my results now. And that's, that's I'm a LabVIEW programmer. Well, the tip of that particular pyramid is quite small for us guys. I mean, I don't know the quantity in the UK, but I bet there's probably less than 200 people who are doing LabVIEW day in, day out. That's the only thing
Well,
Maybe-
actually,
maybe
I don't know.
actually,
Yeah,
probably a bit
yeah,
lower than
yeah. I think the challenge is actually in some of this as well. Coming back to about the tools developer, is there's a circular thing there as well to say that there's not a very good business selling tools to LabVIEW developers because there aren't many of them. So therefore, people aren't building an expertise in it because there's not a business, and there are issues there as well. But yeah, I think we've got to be realistic as a community relatively as to what we can do. I just still feel like we can do more. We're never going to be, sometimes JavaScript now I think can be like a, cut and paste. All right, I'll install these 4 libraries and get this one talking to this, and we're done. I don't think we're ever going to get to that.
I think for me, you can't manage your way through this. You have to just open the door. And I think, we talked about it with the reuse stuff. Is you have a doorway, you have a palette that is searchable, that you can bring this stuff in, and it's questionable, the quality and all the rest of that. Nobody vouches for it. Doesn't have to be every input and output doesn't have to be documented. It's just people's shared code.
Yeah.
And then let it run itself. And that may create the marketplace if people don't feel obliged they have to maintain anything and they can just release it to the world. Then it becomes something that might happen. But
basically, all my open source stuff, I put out a version on there that's generally going to be pretty poor quality. It's my first pass, first draft. Does this even work? To just gather some interest, and if there is interest, then you can develop it further.
If I'm on my block diagram and I go right click, I want a.
Oh, sorry, you're talking actually ID.
I want to see a CLI tool.
Yeah.
But I don't want right click, control space.
Yes.
Yeah.
CLI tool or whatever. That's not there. That link, and so then I have to stop what I'm doing. I have to then go off and look up, and eventually, after some digging around and searching, I'll find something. I have to download it, and I have to install it.
Whereas if you're looking like, if I go back to the Java world, you've got your Maven repository, where in your IDE you type a search and you go, I want that library. It'll list all the libraries. It'll give you their versions, and you can go, okay, I want that one. You include one line in your compile file or your build file, and it does all the checkout. It does all of that for you. It's transparent.
Package management is going to be a huge part of this.
And going back to the framework talk as well, is that in Java you want a framework for messaging, so you have a framework for messaging. You want a framework for UIs. So you can have loads of frameworks that you import into your project to use to build your application. Whereas the LabVIEW is a framework, as I said, that does everything.
Yeah.
So perhaps the thing we should be working on is a quick drop link to GitHub.
So I mean, behind all of this,
that'll be the way.
Last time. I started building a tool that does submodules.
Yeah.
But again, you're limited to the way LabVIEW works, and that you can't, because of namespaces and everything, or there are issues with it.